rather than default to abstract formal academic discourse, it seems important to start by finding a way to dwell in our difference. Now, this series is developed out of a foundation committee to create an association for craft knowledge. And one of the members, Kolakesa Wafa Mahina Tuai, with her partner Barbara Makawati Afitu, has been developing a highly successful series that, in a sense, has inspired Reinventing the Wheel, called Talk Story, which featured object tellers from across Moana. These talks began with a statement in language from Lagi Mama, and I'll let Kolakesa introduce the source of the Tongan concept of whakatapu, which offers us a model for how we might begin these gatherings. Kolakesa, would you like to say something about that? Unmuting?
Yes, sure. Tapu moe ha'a, mana langi mama, tapu moe ha'a, mana whenua, tapu moe ha'a, mana moana, tapu moe ha'a, mana ilo moe poto, tapu moe ha'a, mana kotoa pe whaafakatapu a ka e tā ke whai hafkaho ha'a. I acknowledge the sacred lineages of Langi and Mama, our heavenly and earthly realms. I acknowledge the sacred lineages of Mana Whenua, Tangata Whenua, the indigenous peoples and lands of Aotearoa, New Zealand, of whom I'm here and speaking from. I acknowledge the sacred lineages of my ancestors of the wider Moana Oceania. I acknowledge the sacred lineages of all our holders of knowledge and skills. I acknowledge the sacred lineages of each and every one of you who are here on this Zoom platform. And, may I ask, and be permitted from you all to share with you a little bit about our process that we undertook with Langi Mama Academy and Consultancy together with Tolu Ma'anawe Barbara Makwati Afitu, who may not be here today now because it's her mum's 80th birthday. But my name is Kolakesa Wafa Mahina Tuai, as Kevin introduced, and I just want to introduce someone else. I'm not going to talk about whakatapu. I'm going to bring on Hufanga Heako Moelotu, Professor Agustino Mahina, who has been a key mentor for Langi Mama and our journey, but also who helped inform our whole process with the Talk Story Tuesdays to speak to it. So my apologies for Whanghea Kumalotu and Kevin, the cross communication. And I actually thought we were going to do that as part of our sharing next month, but we'll just go with the flow. So I'm passing it on to you, Whanghea Kumalotu, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a brief just overview of the meaning around our concept and practice of whakatapu that we talked about, and then maybe we can talk about it more in depth when we share next month through this platform. Malo pito.
Yeah, that was a surprise, Kevin. But do you hear me?
Yes.
And I'm reminded of the words of the old and wise Heraclitus of Ephesus, one of the great pluralist philosophers of ancient Greece, who once said, it always pays to expect the unexpected, which is what is happening now. I didn't expect to be part of this most beautiful talanoa, critical yet harmonious talk. But nevertheless, I shall leave that on the side and say a little bit about this amazing concept and practice of whakatapu. The word whakatapu is derived from the word tapu, which has been translated into English through contact with explorers and discoverers of the deep past, Captain Cook and all. To whakatapu is to sanctify, to make it real, whole, total, to give it symmetry, harmony, and more importantly, beauty. And of course, the word tapu is derived from the word eiki, which simply means chiefly, which is in turn derived from the word godly. That is, it's a divine concept, not in a mysterious sense, but in a real sense, which is a reference to a condition of proportion, balance, harmony, in which case beauty is a function of all these entities. And in Tonga, as we do across the wider Moana Oceania, we begin with the whakatapu to everything we do formally and substantially. I say the beginning of this gathering, we begin with the whakatapu as you began with Dr. Mari. It was exciting. The whole idea is to hit both the mind and heart through thinking and feeling, always as hoa, soar or bears of equal and opposite binaries. You don't just talk about the heart without the mind or feeling without thinking. You talk about both. Why? Because they are inseparable yet indispensable. And to talk about one without the other is to incomplete the equation. But to talk about both is to complete the whole equation, because they are inseparable and indispensable. And obviously, to say, to do the whakatapu is all about the above, is to set the scene, to engage in a kind of transformation of body, mind, and heart from a condition of chaos. I mean, just before we came here to engage in this lovely forum, we were all over the place. Our bodies, ourselves, our minds, our hearts. But then once we begin to actively and critically engage in the event, that's when we begin the transformation from one of chaos to a situation of order. And it's a way of bringing us to a common point where we intersect, that is where we connect and separate. And how lovely it is a concept and practice, because by its very own nature, which is investigative, transformative, and communicative. All three. We are here to investigate, we are here to transform, and we are here to communicate. By bringing all three into a common point where we meet, that is the purpose of whakatapu, is to set the scene, to bring into it symmetry, harmony, and beauty. And what a lovely condition. Can we, talanoa, can we talk in a fairly chaotic condition? We can't. But if we begin with a whakatapu, as Kolokesa did, that's a way of setting the scene, of engaging in the whole process of investigation, transformation, and communication, right from the beginning to the end. But probably, good doctor, that's enough for now, which I'm sure we will continue to reflect on this as we progress. And the Lagimama Hoa Soa pair have asked me to be part of their presentation in due course. So I shall leave it at that, just to give us a sense of why the hell do we begin with this sort of formality and substantiality, this kind of protocol of etiquette. It's so fundamental. And more importantly, as Kolokesa said, it's a kind of recognition, admiration of the partnership between humanity, between people and the environment. The very critical issue which we are confronted with, the environmental crisis, the climate change, COVID-19, all these have direct bearings on the imbalance of that very fundamental partnership between people and the environment, or the environment. So I rest my case and pass the ball back to you, Dr. Kevin Murray. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to share. And malopito.
Thank you so much, Professor Mahina. It's a sign you needed no rehearsal. This was something that came straight from the heart. And I think we should be very generous, because this is a spirit that pervaded the Talk Stories series and Moana Conversations. And here we have putting it into a context beyond Moana. So hopefully we can carry some of that respect and understanding with us. So thank you so much. And to go to our next step, I'd like to call on Hae-Yong Cho from South Korea as a way of opening this up beyond Moana into our wider world, who will say something in her Korean language. Hae-Yong Cho is Secretary General, Korean Craft and Design Foundation, and previous director of the Cheongju International Craft Biennale, and a wonderful advocate for her culture. Hae-Yong Cho, are you there?
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Kevin. And I would just like to continue with what Professor Mahana said. in that this is a period in Korea which we refer to as 공생 and 공존 and 삼매 수행, which means that the heart and the mind and the hand, as we know very well in the crafts, should be one, and we need to be immersed in nature in order to survive in this difficult period, as we are going so far away from our basic instincts, which has been the core of our craft movement in Korea since the ancient times, is to bring nature into our living environment. And so it's a period that we have to all survive together, which is 공생, meaning co-survival, and then coexistence, 공존, existing together with nature rather than going against it.
Okay, 감사합니다. Thank you very much, Hae-Young Cho. And we hope to hear more of the Korean perspective later in this series. Now, I'd like to finally introduce our speaker, Aarti Kawlra, to share her understanding of a key journey in Indian craft. Aarti Kawlra is a scholar affiliated to the International Institute of Asian Studies in Leiden and in the Netherlands. She's also the author of many articles, and her book, We Who Wove with Lotus Thread, is featured in Garland and is a wonderful telling of the Padma Salya caste of sari weavers, and reflects a new generation of Indian craft scholarship, which is in partnership with its artisan subjects. This evening, Aarti will share with us her understanding of Indian craft in the early 20th century and the role it played in the broader decolonial process across Asia. Welcome, Aarti.
Thank you, Kevin. Hello, everyone. I'm very grateful for this wonderful opportunity to share with you my thoughts and some ruminations and research after rethinking and relooking at some important scholars and activists and intellectual thinkers in India in the 20th century. I also want to acknowledge Kolokesia and Dr. Mahina. I really think that the presentation that I make will have some resonance to this idea of being situated in our context and our environment and being aware of our context for wider harmony. So I think it's, thank you very much for this invocation. Also to Cho, thank you for this invocation. I will without any delay share my screen. I'm trying to do this for the first time, but Kevin, you have to let me share my screen for that. Kevin? Kevin, it seems that I can't share the screen. Okay, I still can't. Kevin? Okay, thank you very much for that. I'll go right into my presentation. So this presentation is about exploring craft as a decolonial option. I will look at the intellectual climate of the 20th century India to see what prompted thinking about craft as an independent site for decolonial thinking and doing. At that time, during the colonial period, craft stood in for India as a whole. They were craft was a tangible marker of all that was traditional, embodying notions of backwardness, but also of beauty of a bygone era. This is a pavilion that was the India Pavilion at the Great Exhibition of 1851 at the Crystal Palace in London. So this was a kind of great exhibition, the first of its kind, where India was showcased for its craft traditions and craft heritage. There were other pavilions as well, but as far as I know, that America played its guns at that time, if I'm not mistaken. In addition to being seen as a traditional enterprise and a kind of congealed idea of the past and the present, craft also was, the way it was viewed in the colonial period, it also allowed artisans to be ethnologized. So, and traditionalized. So the labeling of craft products as traditional was accompanied by producers as well being placed in this timeless space of an authentic, immemorial past. They were also placed in colonial records and exhibitions as the native Indian craftsman, and whose visual identity was that of an anonymous ethnological body at work. There were exhibitions as well where craft was displayed in a very ostentatious and very special manner, because India was a craft nation for the colonial world. And this is there's a photograph on the left of King George and Queen Mary at Coronation Park at Delhi in 1911. This Delhi exhibition, and they were held earlier as well in 1877 and 1903, was a result of a collaboration among museum professionals, art educators, colonial district collectors, who were responsible for the pre-selection of artisans and exhibits. Since artisans were resistant, British schools and administrative departments became sites of art tutelage, turning prisoners and students into artisans who were then ordained to produce authentic products. So it was basically principals of various colonial art colleges like the one in Madras or in Bombay or in Lahore, who were given the duty of being expert consultants to select these craft products from their region and also to curate these exhibitions. So, how did this idea of decolonial thinking come about? The issue was really that of the specter of capitalism and industrialism and the progress and the path that they were showing to the rest of the world. And there was a kind of civilizational struggle that was perceived between the Western materialist capitalist idea of being in the world and the civilizational idea that Asia represented. So at a speech in Japan in 1916, Tagore said, and I quote, "We have been repeatedly told that Asia lives in the past. It is like a rich mausoleum which displays all its magnificence in trying to immortalize the dead. We accepted this accusation and came to believe it. In India, I know a large section of our educated community grown tired of feeling the humiliation of this charge against us." So it's a kind of a feeling that emerged in early 20th century of this kind of feeling small, of kind of feeling that we need to think differently about who we are. We cannot allow ourselves to be framed in the way that we were being framed. So in 1901, Rabindranath Tagore started a school at Sriniketan, and he modeled it on the lines of the ancient Gurukula system. After he received the Nobel Prize in 1913, this school was expanded into a university in 1921. It was renamed Vishwa Bharati, its symbolic meaning being defined by Tagore as where the world meets in one nest. The aim of this educational institution was quest for truth, blending the methods of learning of the East and the West. So Tagore explored the idea of an education catering to the needs of any child with a rural background in collaboration with economist Leonard Elmhirst. At Sriniketan, which is outside of Calcutta, it's part of this Shantiniketan complex, productive work and training in handicrafts was conducted in a milieu of joy of play that is work, emphasizing the aesthetic experience and quality of manual work in enhancing creative self-expression and personal growth. A child's initiation into Shiksha Shastra, as that was what the craft center was called, Elmhirst wrote, was an apprentice in handicraft as well as a housecraft. In the workshop as a trained producer and as a potential creator, while as an inmate of the house, as a citizen of the small community. So by the mid-1930s, Sriniketan had evolved into a laboratory of life where resident and guest experts, community workers, and villagers jointly engaged in rural welfare and economic revitalization through craft in an open atmosphere of cultural osmosis. Sriniketan was made up of a number of demonstration units where experts, and many of them came from Europe as well, in cottage industries worked on real-life concerns of the villages. In fact, Tagore was very much influenced by the Sloyd system in Denmark, and he sent somebody from Calcutta to Denmark to invite people, and then eventually people from Denmark and Sweden did come to Sriniketan and train in tanning and woodwork. So in his book, Creative Unity, Rabindranath Tagore kind of outlines his idea of situated learning or contextual learning or situated awareness. Our education should be in full touch with our complete life. Excuse me. Economical, intellectual, aesthetic, social, and spiritual. For true education is to realize at every step how our training and knowledge have organic connection with our surroundings. For us, the highest purpose of this world is not merely living in it, knowing it and making use of it, but realizing our own selves in it, not alienating ourselves from it and dominating it, but comprehending it and uniting it with ourselves. So craft was a kind of a universal aesthetic ideal for Tagore. The joy of unity within ourselves, seeking expression, becomes creative, whereas our desire for the fulfillment of our needs is constructive. Similarly, the water vessel taken as a vessel alone, taken as a vessel only, offers the apology for its existence. But where it is a work of beauty, it has no question to answer. It has nothing to do but to be. So, for Tagore, the work of Swadeshi, or literally the idea of one's own or one's own country, was not to be addressed through participation or to participation in politics or in the machinery of governance, but through the engagement in the collective life of the samaj or society. His educational experiments form the scaffolding of his notion of samaj, which, being outside the purview of the British Raj, inhabited the realm of Swadeshi, understood as societal awareness. In Tagore's understanding, Samaj is hospitable, a principle that subsumes difference, whereas sarkar or government is disciplinary. Samaj is one's own, whereas sarkar or government is imposed upon one. And the challenge for him lay in the collective life of the samaj or society, not in the workings of the sarkar.
Ellie Lawrence Wood. Ellie Lawrence Wood.
So Gandhi had also visited Tagore's Shiksha Shatra at Sriniketan in 1925, and he had invited Arya Nanayakam, the then principal of the school, to help run an experimental school at Wardha along similar lines as a model for pan-Indian primary education, which later came to be called basic education. But in fact, the Wardha model that Gandhi implemented had an overemphasis on economically productive work, which was in the daily routine of the school. And that occluded the pedagogical aspects of Tagore, which was play and creativity. They were so vital for Tagore, which were in many ways neglected in basic education that was later brought out by which was experimented in Wardha. So at the ashram at Seva Gaon in Wardha, Gandhi insisted on manual work as bread labor, quite unlike the way in which Tagore had formulated the idea of craft or handwork. According to Gandhi, his resistance to Western civilization is based on the assumption that Asiatics are fit only to copy everything that comes from the West. So in some ways, even though Gandhi and Tagore were they were very good friends, and Tagore had huge respect for Gandhi, and it was he who had given the title of Mahatma to Gandhi, there were many very basic differences between the two. Gandhi's proposal for an extended period of training in a craft and plan of earning while learning, or self-supported education, is found in many of his writings in his periodical Harijan. They are also in a compilation of speeches and essays titled Educational Reconstruction, the proceedings of the Wardha Education Conference, the Zakir Hussain Committee report, and the syllabus that was published in by the Hindustani Talimi Sangh. So there was a lot of work that was done to institutionalize basic education along the lines that Gandhi had propounded. But not enough had been done in the which had basically taken out the aesthetics and the joy from the kind of from craft as it had been formulated by Tagore. At the same time, Gandhi had a larger vision, which was that of a kind of economics, which was also expounded by many economists like J.C. Kumarappa and also Radhakamal Mukherjee, who talked about a kind of economic regionalism and focused on the stimulation of small-scale or craft-based industries, as well as scientific farming in the countryside. Their idea was to resist the industrialization, as Gandhi had said, that was upon us from the colonial capital investments that were being made in the 19th and 20th century. So, so really, to sum up Tagore and Gandhi's views on the spinning wheel and the idea of craft work. So when Gandhi said that you can bring about great personal improvement by spinning a wheel, Tagore's response was that spinning a wheel consists of endlessly turning the wheel of an antiquated machine with a minimum of imagination and a maximum of boredom. Tagore was very much concerned about the joyful and aesthetic aspects of craft. So how was this re-articulated? How were Tagore's ideas infused, both Tagore and Gandhi's ideas, how were they infused in the re-articulation of craft in the post-war period? So here, as we know, craft came to be accepted worldwide as a modernist project for decolonizing Asian and African countries who were seeking to rebuild their national selfhood. The period of World War II, in fact, represented a peak of transnational optimism, of a non-Western alternative modernity, which Asia was kind of showing to the Western world. So it was a kind of combination of Western-style scientific rationality, meritocracy, industrialization, and socioeconomic planning to the imagined time-honored Eastern strengths of community, morality, and spirituality. One of the interlocutors at this time was Ananda Kentish Kumaraswamy. He was from Sri Lanka, from present-day Sri Lanka. And he was part of the intellectually vibrant Tagore circle at Calcutta. And he told, and this is how he articulated this idea to an audience in Madras: people who lived up to their own ideals and who, like the Japanese, had their own arts and industries, would be respected and not succumb to imperialism. So there was a kind of decolonial thinking already, and craft and art and industries were at the heart of this decolonial thinking. Another interlocutor, a feminist and also anti-colonialist, and somebody who's also very much inspired by Gandhi, was Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay. And for her, crafts revival and independence from British rule were interlinked agendas. And not only that, they were also the basis, as Tagore had already articulated, for the unity of Asian nations. In her view, cultural decolonization was as much the need of the hour as political independence, to stall the economic retardation experienced by continents like Asia and Africa under colonization. So at the Inter-Asian Relations Conference held in Delhi in 1947, Kamla Devi's socialist views underpin her stance on Asian and African unity. The skill and self-conscious way of life of the artisan, and not the drudgery of the laboring factory hand, embodied for Kamla Devi the true purpose of craft in the awakening of Asia to its own living sources of knowledge and capacities for economic self-governance. The idea of the global South is incipient in all her work. She was a radical exponent of the idea of South-South exchanges and the decolonization of knowledge. She was also very much inspired by Japan. Inspired by the Japanese state's patronage of craft and her friendship with the Kensei family of potters, Kamla Devi acknowledged that her foundation for the development of crafts in India after independence was in truth laid in Japan, even though she was skeptical of Japan's emergence as an imperial power in Asia at the time. She was impressed by the Japanese approach for the transmission of craft skills and techniques, which she saw firsthand at a class led by Shoji Hamada. And I quote her, "I was impressed by the master's concept of a class, that no one can really teach a craft. Students can be advised on quality of clay, point out different processes and techniques like firing. Sensitivity to aesthetics, finesse in workmanship have to be cultivated by the students themselves." Kamla Devi sought to infuse craft with an aesthetic sensibility whose cultivation, she believed, could be the wellspring of an Asian cultural renaissance in modernity. So it was with Kamla Devi that in India, we were able to institutionalize craft, not just in India, but also abroad. Kamla Devi was, along with Eileen Webb and Margaret Patch, they co-founded the World Crafts Council in 1964. But before that, she had already institutionalized craft in India through a variety of ways. So following the goals of rural reconstruction set by Gandhi, Kamla Devi was instrumental in framing policies and institutions for artisans in independent India. During her work with partition refugees, partition of India as Pakistan and India, refugees at Faridabad town near Delhi, Kamla Devi founded the Indian Cooperative Union in 1948, which later became the model for the organization of production for artisans across the country and provided craft objects for urban consumption through its retail outlet, the Central Cottage Industries Emporium. The All India Handloom Board, implemented under Nehru's first five-year plan in 1952, formally initiated the newly emergent Indian states agenda for shifting artisans' nexus with royal and rural patrons to the burgeoning urban middle classes. The National Handicrafts and Handlooms Museum, set up in New Delhi in the late 1950s, was to support this new aesthetic with a mandate to source material for the revival, reproduction, and development of crafts. By 1965, Kamla Devi had set up the Crafts Council of India, which was a non-profit organization that works in tandem with government agencies for crafts advocacy and schemes for artisans, particularly the Master Craftsman Awards, mirroring the Japanese enunciation of artisans as national treasures. And with that, I end my lecture or presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Decolonial. Sorry we can't be in the room and applaud you together, but I think you can take that as for granted. You've got a few hands going up there, and we would be very pleased to take questions or comments if you'd like to ask something of Aarti. So while people are formulating this, Aarti, you know, in terms of the very interesting dialogue between India and Japan, we heard how the Indians drew very much on the parallel anti-colonial or anti-Western sentiment within Japan, and particularly a focus on craft, having a strong culture that might resist that. Did you get any sense of a similar impact in Japan itself? Is this something which has been explored at all?
Yes, in the sense that with Yanagi, Suetsu Yanagi, Yanagi and Kumaraswamy, they were contemporaries. And there was a lot of exchange in terms of revitalizing the rural hinterland and rural peasants in Japan. And in that respect, there was some kind of similarity. But Japan wanted to become the Asian power during, and because of that, it had a different agenda. And so a lot of the crafts were industrialized in Japan. There was also scientific nationalism in Japan. So there was a kind of, even though Yanagi's movement, the Minge movement, allowed for a space for craft, there was also a kind of industrialization of Japanese craft. So there was, which did not happen in India. What did happen was rural reconstruction. There was some kind of, for example, with all the rural economics that I mentioned to you, there was small scale industries like sugar, oil pressing, all those kind of things, soap making, those kind of things were encouraged in India, but not the industrialization. There were kind of almost like two different paths, industrialization and rural development or rural reconstruction.
Thank you. I wonder if I could bring in Hye-Yung Cho here, since you've been thinking and studying very much within an East Asian context, the Japanese notion of craft, koge, and so on. And obviously, Korea's had a very strong history itself in terms of Japanese influence. How do you see, in terms of that moment when there was a Pan-Asian sensibility for craft, how does that look from a Korean perspective? Was there anything parallel to that in Korea?
Yes, I see a lot of parallel between what Aarti has just said about decolonizing our culture, because we are still in the process of decolonizing. Because much of Korean crafts was exposed to the world through the eyes of Yanagi and Bernard Leach. And so many of the terms that were created during the colonization between 1910 and 1945, literally up to 1948, has been based on Japanese scholars. So as the word craft that we use, which is koge, and we say kungye, which is a combination of two words, which means skill and aesthetics, is completely different to the notion of how it is interpreted in Japan than it is how it is understood in Korea. So we are still undergoing researches, and we lack people, scholars, actually openly talking about it, because we are still quite sensitive towards the period between 1910 and 1945 in terms of the scholars, because so much of it has still to be developed, and so much of it has still to be openly exposed and talked about. We have from about the year from the turn of the millennium, we have been doing more researches, and we did also have a period of industrialization, which was in the 1930s onwards, but mostly ran by the Japanese people, and using our resources to export many of the ceramics to Japan. So our resources were literally burnt out during the colonization. And so we have some materials of that. And then once the Japanese left, we continued with the factories. And so what you know as Gwangju and Korean Ceramic Company is a follow-up from what the Japanese had industrialized. So there's a whole broad spectrum of decolonizing still to be done, and we're still in the process of doing it. And in terms of the terminology, it has to be still much to be sorted. But amongst all that, our craft movement really began in the 1950s, because we literally had nothing after the Korean War, and we had other cultural influences coming in from England, America, France, Russia. So we were in a complete state of, disshuffle. So we need to really, we needed to really sort this out. So the government had passed a law strategically setting that we have to find what is Korean heritage. So it was implemented in the university environment. So from 1960 onwards, craft became an academic subject within the university. So it was a two-track kind of development, where you had the artisan, the heritage, carry on from the ancestors, and then you had the university education, which was a combination of influence from Japan and America. And we are still in the process of analyzing this.
Thank you, Hae-young. It's very interesting. Even today, I read an article about the refashioning of the hanbok, the traditional dress, as a hot fashion item. And now this month we heard the word K-craft along with K-pop. So perhaps that reflects not so much the original traditional mode of craft, but the more commercial. So certainly a lot of work to be done, and your comments on the recent naming of the Seoul Museum of Craft Art
Yes.
is shows how much work there is, and hopefully
I
these
can
kind of
say,
conversations can contribute
yeah.
to it.
Yeah, and maybe we should all go to the craft museum to have this kind of open discussion, because I was a member of the craft museum in the initial stages, starting when the museum was about to start. I was part of the organizing committee, and so we agreed on the name of Seoul Craft Museum, because we thought the word craft had its own identity and strong enough to stand on its own. And then 2 years later, I suddenly hear that we're going to change the name. So I said, why are you going to change the name? And then obviously it comes from the word koge, which means skill and aesthetics. So they wanted to leave it open-ended so that they could add the arts, so that they could have an expanded collection of whatever is beyond what they think or they understand, define as craft. So now it's become Seoul Museum of Craft Art. I mean, we can go on forever on this discussion.
We will have time now. Professor Mahini.
Yeah. Malapito, Dr. Kevin Murray, for another opportunity. My formalo to you, Aarti, for such a beautiful talk. I was captivated from the word "ko" to the end. For two things. Firstly, I nearly fall off my chair when you mentioned my hero, Tagore. We did one of his plays in Tonga when I was still at high school, the Sannyasi.
Wow.
Oh, you cannot ask for more. But I mean, the whole spectrum of the work of this genius, this universal man, it's mind-boggling. I mean, it's so mind-heartening and heartwarming to just immerse oneself in the depth and height of the mind of this universal man, Tagore. His poetry, his plays, his philosophies, you mentioned it, man. It's just amazing. I was lucky to have come across this great man, this genius, this universal man. And I learned that he established his own university, as you mentioned, and I'm a bit too old now to come and study there, but it's too late. I'm exiting. I'm going.
Well, we've come to you tonight.
Thank you. And secondly, not only have I learned a lot, again, relearned this great genius, Tagore, but I am entering to the world of craft, led by you all as experts in the field. I have some kind of general knowledge of the subject, but not as deep and as thorough as you all are. But I, as you talk, I was reflecting on our case, the case of Tonga. Obviously, we do not have the distinction between art and craft does not exist in Tonga. Art and craft are a coexistence. In that, beauty and utility are too a coexistence. Not only things are made to be beautiful, they are also made to be useful. And conversely, the fact that they are useful is because they are so beautiful. And that's how inseparable the two are. But I just wanted to finish off with this thing that I just thought about. I think Dr. Murray kind of referred to it in passing in his introduction. Craft as a hand art. I fell in love with that, and I'm still thinking through it. But in our case, across our three divisions of Tongan arts, performance, material, and fine arts, the role of the hand is very central to all, within and across. But I noticed something, that there is this kind of flow of energy from the hand to heart to mind and back, from mind to heart to hand, in that kind of conversation, the flow of energy. It's so amazing. It's so amazing. But then that's the amazement I got from your presentation, Aarti. And thank you so much for the opportunity to comment.
We're privileged to hear this comment, and it was very auspicious in terms of the different Tongan, Korean perspectives that are already invoked so far in our process of reinventing the wheel. To take things back to India, I'd like to invite Divya to ask a question about decolonization. Divya, are you there?
Malo.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon, Aarti ma'am. My name is Divya. I was your student at NIFT in 2003-4. So it's nice to see you after a few years. I'll anyway paste my question also in the chat box so you can see. I have two questions which I believe are interlinked. My first question is, what in your opinion is the influence of decolonization in defining Indian heritage at the present? And the follow-up is, have the current generation of makers, designers, even users moved away from adopting the colonial gaze? Have we moved past that?
Divya, these are wonderful questions. I think I will take up the second one first. I do feel that I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure if we have totally decolonized our mind when we look at the way the design industry or the craft industry or the cottage sector is being viewed at the moment. So I'm not sure about that, because even though NID was set up and it would, after the advice of the IMSs, the American designers who had come to when Nehru was setting up the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad, they had said that you don't need a design institute. There is enough craft and enough design in your country for you. You don't need it. And this was in the 1960s or late 50s. But I don't think we have done that. And with regard to your first question, the H word, which is the heritage word, as you know, it's a UNESCO word. It's not something, it's a kind of United Nations kind of word. And it was, and so we have to, yes, we have to look at heritage, but I think we need to look at heritage for whom or whose heritage. So if we ask these two questions, then perhaps we will have a better answer, whether the heritage is for the nation, whether it's at the platform or stage of nations that we are looking at heritage, or whether we are looking at heritage for a people, or and why are we looking at it in that respect. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you, ma'am.
Are there other questions or comments? Okay, I think we've come to the end of the time. After I close it up, if you just want to hang around, if you're interested to understand a bit more about the Association for Craft Knowledge that's being developed, you're welcome to hang on. But now just let me thank very much Aarti Kawlra, who's been really a guiding light for us in terms of gathering together these various strands. And I certainly recommend her book and her articles and the podcast for the way in which she, like a generation of Indian scholars now, are looking at working with artisans very much in partnership and looking at how the documentation isn't just a cold piece of ethnography, but is actually can be a form of promotion. It's a way of articulating their views. It's something that artisans are very much part of. And we'll see an example of that next Saturday when Lokesh Gai, one of our committee, who will be presenting the work of the Wali folk artists. And he's been involved with a number of academics, particularly in the UK, in documenting their work. But on Saturday, we'll have the chance to actually hear directly from them in an event which is a performance where the proceeds go to them and they can sell some work, and their role as story makers is profiled and given a voice. And I think that's part of the challenge of going ahead. And it's very much a matter of remembering the path that people have taken prior to us. Such figures as Gandhi and Tagore cast such shadows. We shouldn't be overwhelmed by it, but certainly there's so much to learn. And in that, I think this wonderful Moana phrase, which certainly will resonate when we come back next time with Lagi Mama, of the past being in front of us. And I want to thank very much Aarti Kawlra for bringing this past before us so that we can find a way ahead in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody else for being here at this inaugural talk.
Malo pito.
Mm.